we're going to move forward without them. Okay, so I'm going to just jump back into the discussion that we were having on, make sure I get this right. Nope, I didn't. Now. So I'm going to just jump back into the discussion that we were having on Tuesday. Remember, we were talking about different forms of municipal government. By the way, what do we mean by municipal government? What is a municipal government? What's another word for municipal corporation? City. Yeah, that's all we mean. City government, right? As opposed to, what are the other forms of local government that we have in Texas? We have city governments, municipal corporations. We have, what's another type? By the way, who remembers, we didn't make a big deal about it last time. I just sort of mentioned it in passing. Roughly speaking, how many municipal governments do we have in Texas? No, that number applies to another type of local government. Okay, so we'll come back to that. Municipal governments. Think about a map of Texas and all the cities that you see identified on the map of Texas. There's got to be way more than 254, right?
Maybe like 500.
Oh, it's even more than that. You're about halfway there. Okay.
1,000?
Yeah, it's I think, let me see, I think I have a graphic here. Oops. Yeah, there we go. You can see in Texas, we have about 1,400 general purpose governments, but 254 of those are counties. So we're talking about somewhere around 1,200, somewhere around that municipal government. So City of Sugar Land is one of about 1,200, okay, somewhere in that neighborhood, all right? So we have, again, let's do it this way. We started with the distinction between general purpose governments and special purpose governments, right? Among general purpose governments, in Texas, we have two types. We have counties, there are 254 of them, and we have municipalities, which there are about 1,200 of those. And then among municipalities, we have two types, general law cities and home rule cities. Okay, so we can get back to that distinction, okay? What's the other major type, though? We have something called general purpose governments, then there must also be something called special purpose governments, and that would include what would be an example of a special purpose government. A school district, right? Yeah, it has a special purpose. It only has one purpose, and that is to administer public elementary and secondary education. Okay, but we have, other than school districts, and by the way, I think there's something like 1,100 school districts in Texas. But other than that, you have community college districts, like say the Wharton Junior College District, okay, or the Houston Community College District, okay. You have river authorities, like the Brazos River Authority, right? You have rural fire prevention districts. You have municipal utility districts, MUDs as they're called, levee control improvement districts, okay? You have hospital districts in Texas, okay? There's no shortage of governments in Texas. For as much as we like to say that Texas is, Texans don't like government, you wouldn't know it by virtue of the fact how many that we've created, because we've created a bunch of them. And most of them are special purpose governments, special district governments, okay? Meaning that they only have one function. Obviously, then a general purpose government would be one that has multiple functions, general functions. So like a county government for people who live in a unincorporated area. You understand what I mean by that, right? We kind of were talking about that a little bit last time, right? If you live in the city limits of Sugar Land, you live within an incorporated municipality. But if you live outside of the city limits of Sugar Land or Richmond or whatever the city is, if you just live out in Fort Bend County, you're not under the jurisdiction of a municipality, but you are under the jurisdiction of a county. And so people who live in, say, I think Pecan Grove was the example that I used last time. If people in Pecan Grove call 911, for example, to get a law enforcement response, they're not going to get a City of Richmond police officer or police cruiser that comes up. What are they going to get? No? No? Sheriff, Fort Bend Sheriffs. department is going to come, right? Okay. So people who live in unincorporated areas, everybody in Texas lives in one of the 254 counties, but not everybody in Texas lives in one of the 1,200 municipalities. So for the people who live in unincorporated areas, they get their general purpose government is the county. They get their law enforcement from the county. They get their, yes. Yeah, but that also serves the municipalities in the area. So for example, if somebody's arrested in the city of Richmond or city of Sugar Land, let's say, and they're arraigned in a district court, that's they're probably going to go to that Fort Bend Justice Center, because you're talking about the criminal justice system. That's actually a function of the state. That's not a function of the municipality, even though they might have been arrested and taken into custody by a city of Sugar Land police officer, right? Okay. All right. So it gets complicated. I mean, it is kind of hard to sort this stuff out sometimes. But initially, just remember that we're talking about local governments, right? And local governments, there's two broad types: general purpose governments and special purpose governments. And we understand now the distinction between those two. And now, if we're just talking about general purpose governments, you have to understand that there are municipalities and there are counties, and it really just how an individual is served or a household is served, how people in Texas are served by a local government, a general purpose government, depends on where they live. If they live within city limits, they're going to be served by the municipal government. If they live outside the city limits, they're going to be served by the county government. Okay? And then last time, and this is really the point I was trying to get to, we started talking about municipal governments last time, and we said that, well, there are two types of municipal governments. There are those that we call general law cities, right? And what's the defining characteristic there? Who remembers quickly, so we can move on to new stuff?
General law is less than 5,000.
Population, that's the first consideration. Population has to be less than 5,000. Okay? If it's 5,000 or greater, then they can adopt home rule status, but there has to be a vote. There has to be a vote of the residents. And if it's approved, then they're going to draft the city charter, which is like a constitution for the city, right? That's going to set up the form of government. And that's really the part that we were getting into last time. If we're talking about general law cities, there's really only one form of government. What was that? What's the form of government that applies generally under the state laws of Texas? That's what we mean by general law. Say again? Well, that's not what I'm getting at here. What I'm saying is, no, don't just throw things out there. Okay, think about what I'm asking you here. Okay, what's the form of government? We know that most of the municipalities in Texas are general law municipalities. Most have populations less than 5,000. So therefore, they don't really have any discretion. Meadville, I think, was the example we were looking at last time. Meadville really doesn't have any discretion in terms of their form of government. They must use the form of government that is imposed by state law, which is the mayor-council form of government, right? Although we noted that it is a weak mayor subtype, okay? Now, if the city has a population of greater than 5,000 and they go through that process of having the vote on home rule status and the residents say, yes, we want home rule status, then some options kick in. They draft a city charter, and in that city charter, one of the things that they determine is what is the form of municipal government that they're going to have. So who remembers which form of municipal government most Texas cities have adopted that are home rule? No, in fact, we said that there's only one Texas city. There's only one large or even medium-sized Texas city that has a mayor-council form of government. That's the city of Houston, and it is a strong mayor sometimes. I was just listening to, I was talking about how it's been in the news a lot here in the last couple of weeks. Just this morning, I listened to NPR a lot on my way to work, right? And exactly what they were talking about is the fact that Houston has this strong mayor, and now there's all this controversy about some members of the city council want to be able to, put items on the agenda, and they can't because we have this strong mayor subtype. And so, yeah. So we'll see what changes come to the city of Houston, but at least up to now, it has been, I don't think it's going to change from a strong mayor subtype, but in terms of particular powers, we'll see what changes might be brought in the near future. I doubt anything terribly significant. We'll see what happens. At any rate, Houston is the single exception. I used to include El Paso in that. Okay, El Paso, we used to say not that long ago, maybe about a decade ago, when I lecture about this, I would say Houston and El Paso are the only cities in Texas that have strong mayor forms of government. But about 10 years ago, I think, the city of El Paso changed its charter, and now they no longer have the mayor council form of government. They have some other form, which we haven't gotten to yet. Okay. All right. The other form of government that we did look at last time, though, was the commission form. That's the part I remember we left off on. Am I remembering correctly?
The police commissioners, the problem with the commissioners is that eventually they start to only care about the people that
They can't really look big picture
Yeah.
at the government as a whole. They can only look at certain departments.
you know, like.
Do you find that these diagrams help?
You're talking about Galveston.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hope these diagrams help you, and you certainly could see these on the next quiz, right? Like if I was to just put this diagram up there, take out commission form and ask you to identify what form of government that is, that would be a fair thing on the quiz, I think, okay? But the idea here is that the commissioners are going to be elected to run, there's going to be a different commissioner elected to run each of the departments, okay? And as you all are correctly recalling, we talked about last time, there are some real problems. This is a form of government that began in Galveston, Texas, I heard someone say, after the 1900 hurricane. And remember, I told you that it really caught on, not just in Texas, but across the country. There were lots of even large cities that adopted this form of government, but only took a couple of decades for cities to begin to figure out that this just doesn't work. This form of government didn't work for them. And so there are very few left. There are very few cities that have this form of government. Even if they call it, like if you go over here to Richmond during municipal elections and you drive around and you see the political campaign signs up, I think they say so-and-so, whatever, Joe Smith for city commissioner. But don't be fooled. It's not a commission form of government. They're not really commissioners. They're council members. They just call them commissioners. So you have to be careful in thinking about any individual city, which form of government actually applies, and you can't just go by what maybe they call the person, on the ballot. Okay. Anyway, this form of government really has diminished greatly. The form of government that most Texas cities have, home rule Texas cities, and really in many places around this country is called the council manager form of government. Okay. And the council manager form of government was an innovation of the progressive reform era. You may remember me telling you several class meetings back about the progressive reform era when we were talking about primaries, and I told you about the direct primary. I said that the direct primary was an innovation of the progressive reform movement. If you do recall that conversation that we were having, you may also remember that I told you that the progressives, historically, you take your American history class and you learn about this period of our history. The historians teach you about the progressive reform era. They tend to focus a lot on like the antitrust legislation, the Sherman Antitrust Act and the Clayton Antitrust Act. But it was broader than just that. I mean, the progressives were interested in breaking up economic monopoly. That's what all that antitrust legislation is about. But they were also interested in breaking up political monopoly. And that's one of the reasons, that's why the direct primary came about. Remember, we talked a little bit about that. The direct primary was designed to take a central function of political parties, the nomination of candidates for office, out of the hands of party bosses and put it in the hands of the rank and file members of the party. It was a democratization process. Well, here's another one, right? Not only did the progressives want to take power out of the hands of party bosses, but oftentimes those were mayors in local areas, particularly in big cities. You had these boss rings, as they were called, like, you know, in New York City and in Chicago and other large cities, where the power is really in the hands of the mayor. And that had a partisan aspect to it, but let's focus on the city government aspects of it right now, okay? So the progressives don't like this arrangement, and they believe that the administration of city services suffers as a result of these really, really powerful mayors. Another feature of the progressive reform movement was a belief that politics and administration could be separated. In the latter part of the 19th century, but particularly in the early part of the 20th century, there was this growing belief. It kind of grows out of the school of scientific management in business. Have any of you taken business classes? You've learned about the school of scientific management and trying to create efficiencies and so on. So the progressives sort of took some of these ideas that were growing out of the school of scientific management in business and tried to apply them to government. Woodrow Wilson, for example, you all probably recognize as the president of the United States during World War I. He was actually, does anybody know what his profession was before he became president?
I knew he worked at college. I can't remember if
He was.
a professor or a dean or something.
He was a professor. He was a professor of political science.
Yeah.
Okay, and he was a scholar of Congress, and he wrote a book. I think it was called Congressional Government. But one of the major themes of his book was this idea of separating politics and administration. You know, that's really neither here nor there. I'm just thought I'd throw a name out there that you all recognize. Certainly, he would have qualified in this regard as one of those progressive one of those people who conformed to that progressive idea that you could separate politics and administration. Now, I got to tell you, somebody who's worked in city government. I used to work for the city of Fort Worth. I can't remember if I've told you all that before, but back in the 1990s, I was working in the city manager's office at the city of Fort Worth, and I can tell you that as much as people might want to believe that you can separate politics and administration, it's impossible to separate politics and administration. But that's what the progressives believe. The progressives believe separate politics and administration, turn the administration of city services, take the administration of city services out of the hands of a politician, a mayor, and put it in the hands of a professionally trained and educated, rational bureaucrat, if you will, called the city manager, and everything will be done much more efficiently and much more effectively without regard to politics. That's really the sort of fundamental premise underlying the council manager form of government. This fervent belief that the progressives have that all you have to do is get it out of the hands of a politician, put it in the hands of a professionally trained person. Well, I'm telling you, as somebody who's worked in city government, a city manager, if he or she is going to survive very long, better be acutely attuned to the political input, the political winds of the community. That we have. I don't want to digress too much here, but let me just suggest this to you. You know how most universities have colleges of business administration, and you can go get a degree in business administration, learn how to run a business, etc. Many universities have colleges or schools of public administration. For example, there is at the University of Houston, the Bill Hobby School of Public Affairs. There is at Rice University, a School of Public Affairs. Interestingly enough, one very influential as it relates to local government, training local government officials, is at the University of North Texas in Denton. And a lot of city managers have come through that program up at the University of North Texas in Denton. So you could decide if you're kicking around the question of, well, what should you do what should your profession? You could entertain and maybe even choose to go up to the University of North Texas and get a degree a bachelor's degree in public administration, or better yet, a master's degree in public administration, and go manage a city. But if you do that, be prepared to be dismissed. You better not have a thin skin, because city managers move around a lot. I used to joke that it's kind of like being a baseball manager. That regardless of your record, you might be, if you get George Steinbrenner as your owner, you might be fired just because he doesn't like you today or something. But, you know, when the political winds shift in a community, if the city manager is not sensitive to that, he or she may find himself out of a job, okay? Because the city manager is hired and dismissed by the city council. And certainly the members of the city council are politicians, right? So this idea that you can somehow fix the delivery of city services, make it more efficient, more effective, just by taking the administration of that out of the hands of the mayor and putting it in the hands of a city manager, I think is a tenuous assertion at best. I've never seen a study that I find very convincing that would suggest to us, for example, that police department response times are very different in large cities that have council manager forms of government versus those that have city mayor council forms of government. I think I said that wrong. Let me say that again. I don't think there's any evidence, at least not that I'm aware of, that things like police department response times or fire department response times are any different, any statistically different in cities that have mayor council forms of government, like say Houston, versus cities that have council manager forms of government like Dallas. I bet if you could find the data, if you did a search and you could find the data, that it wouldn't be strikingly different. I could be wrong about that. I'm prepared to back off of that if somebody does decide to look into that. Say, hey, there's a 4-minute difference in police department response times in Dallas versus Houston. And I would say, well, I guess, I should have looked into it myself before I said that. But I've never seen any kind of study that says that would lead us to conclude that council manager forms of government, that city services are done any more efficiently or any more effectively than they are in mayor council forms of government. It's kind of like, it's one of those things like we were talking about in a previous class meeting about this assumption that people have about privatization, that anything that government can do, a private company can do more efficiently, more effectively, is a similar kind of assumption. I don't know that that's valid. It's a similar assumption. Anything that can be done in a mayor council form of government can be done more efficiently in a council manager form of government. I don't think there's the evidence to support that. When people just assert things until it sort of becomes like the conventional wisdom. But is it true? Somebody go out and find that evidence and I'll be willing to say, yeah, I was wrong. Okay, so the basic idea behind a council manager form of government is that the voters elect the members of the city council. And it just depends on the city that we're talking about. They may also elect the mayor separately. For example, they do in Dallas and in Fort Worth, and I think most other, Austin and San Antonio and most other Texas cities that have this one. Here in Sugar Land, I bet it's the same way. I don't live in Sugar Land, so I can't be absolutely sure, but it really wouldn't be that hard to find out. Right? Go to the City of Sugar Land's website. Okay? So in some cities, they elect the members of the city council. Let me stay on that for just a minute. Remind you of something that we talked about previously. So those city council members may be elected at large, or they may be elected from wards or districts, or some combination of at-large. Usually some combination of wards and at large. Like the city of Pasadena. Remember we saw that little video dealing with the city of Pasadena. Remember that some of those council members were elected from districts, from wards, and some of them were elected at large by all of the voters of the city of Pasadena, and the issues that raises, right? Which we'll leave aside for now. So it could be all at large, it could be all districts, or it could be some combination of at large and districts. I think in Texas, it's usually the third option. some combination. And then the city, and they may, as I say, they may elect the mayor separately, but in some cities, they just choose the mayor from among their ranks. Once you have the city council, then say, okay, we've got 16 members of the city council here. Which one of these 16 is going to be mayor? But either way, whether the mayor is separately elected or selected by the city council from among their own ranks, the mayor really has very little authority other than being, as we described last time, the person with the gavel and going and cutting ribbons and things like that, right? Not like the city of Houston mayor, where all the department heads report to the mayor and are politically responsible to the mayor. So in a council manager form of government, they report to the city manager. And there may be some exceptions to that, like kind of like what I was telling you last time. Oftentimes cities will have like a city attorney, and they tend to be separate because after all, the city attorney may have to investigate the city manager's office. But for the most part, the public sector functions, the services that are provided by the city, the police, fire, sanitation, parks and recreation, city health department, all that kind of stuff, all those department heads answer to the city manager. And then the city manager answers to the city council. Okay, so any questions about that form? Straightforward enough? I'm skipping over a lot of stuff, obviously, but we got to have time to talk about county governments too. So here's something, though, that I do want to focus on for just a moment. I think this is important for us to remember. We've made this point previously as well. Okay, municipal elections in Texas are not officially nonpartisan. In other words, candidates for the city council, candidates for mayor, where appropriate, they don't run as nominees of political parties, even though oftentimes the voters of a community know, like I think that's true in Houston. Sylvester Turner didn't run as a Democrat, didn't see that on the ballot, that, Sylvester Turner, Democrat, but I can bet you most voters in Houston know that he's a Democrat. So we're just talking about what appears on the ballot. And under Texas law, city elections, and by the way, special purpose governments as well, like school boards. People who are running for school board don't run as Democrats or Republicans. In most Texas cities, municipal elections are held on the first Saturday in May, but there are exceptions to that, like the city of Houston. I think they have their elections in November, general election day in November. Yeah. But other Texas cities do as well. That's why, again, most are held on the first Saturday in May. And again, as I said previously, most have some combination of at-large and single-member districts. The large cities in Texas. When you start going to medium-sized Texas cities and even like small to medium-sized Texas cities, then it's more likely that you're going to have at-large. The only other thing I wanted to mention to you here about municipal government before we move on to county governments is just to talk a little bit about one of the things that distinguishes home rule cities from general law cities is that they have more flexibility, not only in terms of public, making what we call ordinance making power. Right? Let me take this off here for just a second so you don't get too busy looking at that. Okay. Uh-oh. That might have been a mistake. Anyway, let me talk while this is doing its thing. Okay, so home rule cities have more discretion than general law cities do on tax rate and taxing authority. For example, general law cities, ones with populations of less than 5,000 that are governed under the general laws of the state of Texas, they don't have sales tax authority, right? home rule cities in Texas have sales tax authority. So for example, in Texas, anybody know what the sales tax rate, or what the general sales tax rate is? It's 8.25
sorry. Yeah.
is the combined rate.
Yeah.
Now, most of that, 6.25, is the state portion of the tax. City governments can add up to a penny of sales tax on top of that. So in Sugar Land, for example, you go into a store here and buy an item on which 8.25 sales tax is imposed. A penny of that 8.25, or 1% of that 8.25, is revenue raised for the city of Sugar Land. Okay. People in this area also opted into Metro, which is a special purpose government. You know, Houston Metro,
Yeah.
that has a penny sales tax authority. Okay, so that gets you up to 8.25%. Okay, 6.25 is the state. Municipal governments, Texas home rule municipalities, can add that penny.
Wait, you said it was $6.25, I mean 6.2? Where did the extra big two come from? The penny, no?
Yeah, I just told you, right? So for example, here in the city of Sugar Land, if you go into a store and buy an item, say you buy an item and pay $1 for it, 8.25 cents is going to be taxed. You're going to get your receipt is going to say $1.08, but it's really 8.25, or $1.09, whatever it says, right?
Yeah.
8.25% is the total, but 6.25 is tax revenue that goes to the state of Texas. Okay, 1 penny of that goes to the city of Sugar Land, and the other penny goes to Houston Metro. Okay? But there are other special district governments that can have sales tax authority. Okay, for example, I think the Aliana Management District. If you go up 99 up here, you know where Aliana is? There's a management district there. That's a special purpose government, and I think it has sales tax authority. Some sales tax. So if you go into like Target or something up there on 99 and buy an item that has sales tax on it, some of that's going to the Aliana Management District. Okay?
So
Now,
general, how does that work? You said they don't have that tax. What do they do?
property tax.
Oh.
Now, home rule municipalities also have property tax authority. Okay?
Both.
They have both sales tax and property tax authority. Okay? And there may be other forms of taxation. Again, the general point that I'm trying to make to you is that home rule cities have more flexibility than general law cities. Okay? Because they have ordinance making power, and that includes the ability to set tax rates, et cetera. Ordinance, that's what we call a local law. If we are talking about a law passed by Congress or a law passed by the state legislature in Texas, we generally use that term. It's a statute. But for some reason, when we're talking about local laws made by cities, we say ordinance. It's just a convention that has developed over the years. Okay? In addition to taxing discretion that home rule municipalities have and ordinance making, for example, here in the city of Sugar Land, maybe 15, 20 years ago, I don't know what it was, the city council passed an ordinance prohibiting smoking in public places. When I first moved here in 2013, you could go in, it's not the same anymore, but you could go in to a restaurant that had a bar, let's say, in Sugar Land, there would be no smoking, but if you went into a restaurant, it may even be the same chain. Go into a restaurant in Richmond or Rosenberg, people would be smoking. At least they would have a smoking section.
Yeah.
Now that's come to an end.
There's no smoking section, is there?
Right. No, they don't even have those anymore, do they? But
Wow.
what I'm saying, it wasn't that long ago, but that was the discretion of the local government, right? That's a reflection of their ordinance making power, and some cities would choose to maybe make that particular ordinance, and other cities would choose not to make that ordinance. Okay? in addition to greater taxing discretion and ordinance making power, home rule cities have greater latitude, much greater latitude when it comes to annexation. Right? Annexation is the ability of the city to go out and take in new areas, make it part of the city's jurisdiction, right? And I've had this map up on the screen now for a long time, right? Showing the city limits of, I actually had it linked up, and that's what it was trying to do when I clicked on it. It was trying to link up to, but I think that this web service, Map Technica, you can see up there in the upper left-hand corner, I think it's become a subscription-based thing. I think that's why it's not opening up. But anyway, I managed to get a screenshot of this several years ago, put it in a PowerPoint slide, so I don't have to worry about subscribing. Here you can see the city of Richmond. Look at the city limits of Richmond. I was mentioning this to you the other day. Several years ago, the city of Richmond annexed this strip along Williams Way. If you've driven along Williams Way, you know that this area over here has now been developed into residential housing, right? This area over here is was just sort of like pasture land. The levee was right there. Especially, I think it's now being developed. But why do you think the city of Richmond decided to annex this?
Because it's just too small.
Well, because they were really trying to get to this. The state laws governing annexation would have prevented the city of Richmond here from just going out and annexing this. You can only annex land that is adjacent, right? So they had to annex this first, and then they could proceed to annex this. And then they had to annex this strip. This is Ransom Road here, okay, in order to get to this, which is that area over there I was telling you last time about, over there by Rudy's Barbecue. There's an apartment complex over there, that sort of stuff. Now, why do you think they want this and this? And they annex this in order to get to this and this. I suggested to you last time to prevent the city of Sugar Land from getting it first, but why do they care if the city of Sugar Land gets it? What of value do they see there?
There's a lot, isn't there like land to be filled?
But what, so what? They just want land?
It is close to the freeway, so I guess more people can be by there.
Maybe build more businesses, generate more revenue for more sales?
Oh, there we go. That's what I wanted you to say. Talking about property tax revenue and potentially, if it's commercial development, sales tax revenue, right? They're trying to increase their tax base, right? Now, look, people say, well, that's all, of course, that's all cities want to do. They just want to increase their tax base. But remember, there's a responsibility that goes with that too. If the city of Richmond annexes these areas, not only are they going to be able to get property tax from those homeowners there and the businesses along here and so on, or whatever sales tax revenue is generated there, but they're also going to have to provide services. You're now going to have to provide city of Richmond services. So there's two sides of the coin there. But on balance, cities judge when they annex that they're not overextending their obligations beyond their ability to provide those with the revenue that's generated. Okay, but oftentimes when you look at these kinds of maps for Texas cities, they can look very strange. You know, the city of Richmond here is a good example. I used to have one. Would you just click on this and then call up the city of Sugar Land? The city of Sugar Land also looks very interesting in terms of its boundaries. Yeah, the annexation patterns are determined a lot by various factors. I want to share with you here, let's see if I can find this here real quick. Boy, we're running out of time very quickly in here. I want to share with you, what did I do with it? Bear with me here for just a second. I'm not very good at, here we go. I want to share a relatively short slideshow presentation created by the city of Houston that shows its history of annexation. Why can't I find it? Here we go. Let's try it this way. Okay, so What I'd like to do as you watch this, I'm just going to let it run, but I would like you to pay attention to the matter of when the city annexed certain parcels of land and maybe try to think about why they did it. Okay, so why isn't this opening? Here we go.
Who you including? Oh, no.
I can't remember if this has any sound or not. It does not. Okay, hold on just a second. So this is a silent presentation, but you can read the captions. Okay. Oh, this is frustrating. There we go. I lied, I am going to stop it. All right, so here, this first slide that they're showing you is the original city of Houston, going back to the middle part of the 19th century.
That little green dot.
Obviously, these highways weren't there, folks. Those are just for reference for you, right? That little green square right there, where Buffalo Bayou comes together, I guess with White Oak Bayou or whatever it is, that was the city of Houston. Allen's Landing area down there, okay? That was 1830s. So by 1900, the city of Houston had grown to that green area. You can see the original boundaries there. Okay. About 44,000 people, 9 square miles. The next major annexation came in the second decade of the 20th century.
Okay.
What's that about?
As I'm wondering, does Houston control that river? Or is it a river?
They're annexing in preparation for building the Houston Ship Channel.
Shipping, so they can get more stuff in, more revenue.
So that Houston can become a growing
center.
trade center.
Right, it seems to
So by now, we're up to 77,000 people.
I want
You
you
can-
you put 19, so in 10 years, they gained 33,000 people.
They almost
And they-
doubled.
And yeah, they almost doubled, that's crazy. That is a lot of babies. I wonder why they.
It's annexation, it's not babies.
Oh yeah, to the annex, they added those people too.
All right, so next they annexed the area known as the Heights. Called so because it was 23 feet higher than the rest. Now we enter what they call the boom years. Okay, so you get annexation here, here,
And then so they just take it.
Magnolia Park and Harrisburg in the 1920s. Independence Heights, which was the first African-American incorporated community in Texas, was then annexed by the city of Houston.
Took them 60 years.
Oh,
1930s, not too much.
Just a little.
I wonder why.
The Great Depression.
Oh, I would think that has a lot to do with it, yeah.
Yeah.
People are, I ain't spending nothing.
Even so, the population continued to grow to 400,000. 1940s, a lot of annexation.
Is that when
You get
the World War II?
This is-
Wasn't the suburbs developed?
okay, double the size in terms of territory. You get this area down here, what becomes Hobby Airport. Okay, Pleasantville out here, Houston Gardens and Cashmere Gardens up here. Okay, Spring Branch up here, Oak Forest and the Eastern Spring Branch in the 1940s. Population is now 600,000. By the 1950s, look at this.
That's the suburbs.
All this area, South, Sunnyside and Central Southwest, North Shore, and East Houston, the rest of Spring Branch here, all that in the 1950s. 108 square miles to create Lake Houston. Got to have a water supply for this growing population, right?
They made their own lake. Yeah.
1 million residents. 1960s, you get this area up here, which was annexed to create what is now called George H.W. Bush Airport. Kingwood and Atascocita. 15 years later was de-annexed, but then re-annexed in the 1990s. Out here you get this area to include the Addicks and Barker reservoirs, the Alief area, Clear Lake area down here.
Yeah, every time we go
Okay.
there.
So now we're up to 1.5 million and 557 square miles. Look what happens in the 1980s though. Slows down again so that you only get just an annexation of parcel here or there. Here's the re-annexation of this area up here, Kingwood. Now we're up to 1.7 million residents.
What is that those little land masses in the middle that are not annexed? You see the white patch?
This would be City of Bel Air and West University Place,
Uh-huh.
okay? And
Why
this
did
would
they-
be
That's weird.
like Jersey Village.
So right in the middle, you
No, wait,
would-
what is this? This
you
would
could
be,
do your own thing.
what are the, what are the cities called along I-10? I can't remember the names of those. Like the Memorial area, there's a couple of incorporated cities along Memorial and I-10.
That's weird. So you have your own city in a city.
Yeah, but that's not unique. There are a number of cities that are like that, you know,
They just
around.
didn't want to be annexed.
Well, they just already existed before Houston annexed out here. Bel Air was there before Houston annexed all out here. Okay? So it was already an incorporated city. City of Houston can't annex Bel Air. It's already an incorporated city.
There's always gonna be an
So they're not like, they can't like, if they wanted to be annexed with it?
I don't know how, I have to be honest with you, I don't know how that would work. There's obviously some provision for it in Texas law. I told you that, for example, Independence Heights was the first incorporated African-American community. It obviously had to be unincorporated so that it could be annexed by the city of Houston. So there's some way for that to happen. I guess at least there was at that time under Texas law. I don't know how that would work today. But I can't imagine the residents of Bel Air. It would almost certainly involve a vote of the residents of the city of Bel Air. And I can't imagine people who live in Bel Air ever voting to say, yeah, we want to be part of the city of
It's
Houston.
weird. At that top part, you have like a, kind of like a, I guess, a circle in the middle. It's not Houston. It's weird because like, let's say you're in the middle, right? If you go above, you're in Houston. If you go below, you're in Houston. It's like you're an island surrounded by Houston. But you're,
Sure.
It's just weird. It's just weird.
Well, which raises the interesting question. I mean, that's why, in here on this slide, I was going to ask, what do you think the pattern is more recently here? Why does the city of Houston just annex kind of like this? Well, we're kind of that same scenario that I talked about with the city of Richmond. They are probably, this is not motivated by trying to get water supply. This is not motivated by trying to find land for an airport. This is not motivated by any of those sort of large scale things, large scale capital projects. It's really motivated by tax base.
Yeah.
Right? So notice that the annexation is occurring along major roadways where you probably have commercial development. So they can get that property tax base and that sales tax base, right? It seems that it's also because the state of Texas a couple of decades ago changed laws really restricting the ability of cities to annex.
It's like, you also said this before, you said they can't go from here to like right here, so then they go, all right, we'll just move up here, and then we can branch down, we move up here.
Yeah,
branch down and take over
I don't know that the city of Houston will ever annex those areas that you're talking about there, but
the opportunity.
in the meantime, they certainly can get that property tax or that tax base that, goes along here.
Yeah, they got the roads,
Yeah.
that's all they need.
That's why.
But remember, they have to provide the services too.
That's true,
Yeah.
but they gonna get the money regardless. Houston, they're smart.
Well, it's certainly not unique to Houston.
That's true.
Other cities do it as well. And we were in that period for a while where cities would annex preemptively to try to prevent other cities from annexing before them, like I was kind of describing about Richmond and Sugar Land. I think that was probably a big part of the motivation of the city of Richmond in annexing Williams Way and Ransom Road so that they could get that property tax base before the city of Sugar Land snapped it up, because that was also adjacent to the city of Sugar Land. Remember, the city of Sugar Land, just in the last couple of years, has annexed Greatwood and New Territory. So, you know, they are reaching out for new tax base as well. Okay. Questions, comments? Boy, we just don't have a whole lot of time left, so let's have to be real selective here about. Wanted to show you a couple of videos. We're not going to have time for both of them. There is one that is as boring and dry as you could possibly imagine, but good content, information. There is another one that is much more interesting, and you would probably find it much more enjoyable to watch. Not sure which one we should see here. Let's watch Colonel Mack's video. This is the boring one, and maybe we'll link up the more interesting one for you on the website. Okay, so this is I don't know who Colonel Mack is. Okay, I suspect that he's perhaps on the faculty at Central Texas College in Killeen, probably a former military officer, maybe a retired military officer who's teaching Texas government course at Central Texas College. Anyway, not very interesting. You think my lectures are boring, wait till you get a load of Colonel Mack. But I think Colonel Mack does have some informative things to say here that will help you understand a little bit about county governments. Okay?